Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Stitch Sessions. I am over the moon to take you through this tutorial today. Last week we showed you actually how to do the bunny square in that tutorial. And I kind of hinted that this bunny square, I was going to use it for another project. So some of you may have decided to use yours for a blanket or a baby blanket. But I have used mine to create this adorable toddler pullover sweater. So I have made this in the toddler size. And so I used the bunny square for the front. Now you can certainly do it the same thing on the back, but I decided to leave the back nice and simple. And what is wonderful, absolutely wonderful about this project is that a fairly newer crocheter can indeed do this sweater, believe it or not. So the way we put it together is it's simply made with two large squares, okay? This actually, it's a kind of rectangular. We added a few rows on the ends just to widen the body a little bit, but it's two panels. It's the front and it's the back, which essentially you'll make exactly the same, except if you don't want to do the bunny on the back, you just wouldn't do the ears. And then we make two sleeves, and then we just attach them all together, and we then go back and add this trim here. And I used the Bernat Baby crushed velvet yarn, and it is divine. It's just beautiful and soft and just so cuddly, perfect for a little person. Now, just a little disclaimer about using velvet yarn. If you are a little bit of a newer crocheter, it's just a little bit challenging sometimes to see where to place your stitches. So I'm just going to bring this a little closer here. So you just have to be patient and just really take your time to find your stitches. Now, there's no law that says you have to use the velvet. It just so happens I had bought this skein of yarn, and I actually didn't know what I was going to do with it originally. I just really loved the color and the gradient it has, and the feel, of course, was divine. And so when I started working on the bunny square, I thought to myself, this is what I'm going to use the yarn for. So you can certainly use, regular acrylic or wool, completely up to you. But I used the velvet, and I'm so happy with how it came out. Okay, my friends. So other than that, let's just grab all of our materials and let's dive right in to our velvet bunny pullover sweater. So to make your velvet bunny sweater, here are all the materials you're going to need. Now, for those of you that just saw the tutorial on how to make the bunny square, I am going to continue using the same yarn because that is what this bunny square was intended for, was for this project. So I am using the Bernat Baby Crushed Velvet for the pink color. And if you're curious, this is Crystal Pink Potpourri. It is a medium 4-weight yarn. They are recommending a 4.5 millimeter hook, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. The other color I'm using, I actually don't have the label for. This was yarn that was gifted to me by one of my crochet students. It is a Bernat velvet yarn. It is also considered a medium 4, but it's just slightly thicker than the Baby Crushed Velvet. And so that's why I'm going to talk about the hook sizes. Now, I've told this story, I think, before, but the velvet, as beautiful and lovely as it is to work with, if you are a new crocheter, it can be a bit challenging to find your stitches. Especially if you're not used to the feel yet of the crochet in your hands and the stitches. So one of two things I would recommend: go into this packing lots of patience and take your time. So if you really have your heart set on using the velvet, by all means go for it, but just really, really be patient and take time and be gentle with yourself, right? Like if you're still gaining experience, it just takes time. The other option would be to use different types of yarn. So an acrylic yarn would be nice, and I would also recommend solid colors if you're super new. Again, it just makes it easier to see your stitches, okay? So the other thing is making sure, of course, you always have a trusty pair of scissors along with, I had a darning needle around here, along with a darning needle for sewing in your ends. That's always really important, just having set to the side for when you need them. I also have a piece of paper and a pencil because anytime you're making a garment, it's really important to make notes and write down the measurements you need, especially if you're making a couple of duplicates, which in this project I will be. Okay, so you're gonna need a piece of paper, pencil, or pen. Definitely you wanna have a measuring tape of some kind on hand so you can take measurements. And our hooks. Okay, so I am using 2 hooks for this project. If you saw the bunny square tutorial just recently, I mostly used the 5mm hook here. Okay, but as I continued with the work, because this was just ever so slightly thicker, I now have also reverted to using the 5.5 or 5.5mm hook, also known as an I believe, for the baby crush velvet because it's just a little bit thinner. And by going up a hook size, it just kind of stretches out the stitches and makes them lay a little bit more cohesively with the thicker yarn. So what I am doing is putting more borders around here, which I'll talk about in a second. So these are all the materials you're going to need for your velvet bunny pullover. So let's get started on our sweater. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is make a plan of how we're going to approach this. So I am making it for a toddler, a sweet little person in my life. And so it's important to kind of, first of all, you need to get the measurements. So I am making it for a 3-year-old, but at this age, they grow so quickly. And we don't know how cool or how warm the spring is going to be. So I am going to make this in the size T4, which is really for a 4-year-old and older. This way, if they don't get a chance to wear it this season, she can still wear it the following season. So I always like to do that with garments if you're making it for children, because sometimes depending on what time of year it is, they may grow faster than the opportunity they'll have to wear it. Okay, so I'm going to make it for a T4. So I am not an artist here, as you can tell, but on average, a toddler size T4 will measure about 24 inches around their chest, okay? So we are going to make our panel in 2 pieces, a front and a back. So this means that the width of each panel should be 12 inches across, okay? So that it'll go 24 inches all the way around, okay? So I'm just going to leave it there because I'm going to explain in a really easy way how we're going to put this together. And this is my, beautiful artwork here of what the front is going to look like. Okay. So let's first start off with the fact that our sweater or our pullover is basically made up of 2 squares. So you're going to have a front panel. That's a beautiful square, isn't it? And then you're going to have a back panel. Okay, so I'm just kind of trying to draw it so you can see it. So this is the front of my sweater. So this is where I have the little bunny, and I've done some tracings here. And then the back panel. So what you're going to do, really nice and easy, is you're going to go back and watch the tutorial on how to make the bunny square. And I'm actually going to put it right up there in the card, so it's super easy for you guys to click on. I'm also going to leave it in the description box down below with a link, okay? So you'll have to watch that first to create your bunny square. Now, you can make the 2 squares exactly identical. So it's up to you. If you just want the bunny face to be on the front, just make one with the bunny ears. The other side, you can still make exactly the same way. You can just leave off the ears. Okay, so it's totally up to you. If you want both sides to have the bunny, just make it exactly the way you made the first one, you make the second one. So it keeps it nice and simple. Now, in the bunny square tutorial, I stopped after these 2 rounds here of half double crochets. I am now continuing on to increase the size of my square. Okay, so let me just bring this back up here. So I want to get the square so that it is going to be 12 inches across, so that it's going to be 24 inches in total all the way around, okay? So that means that this square here, we're going to ignore these two little top parts here. This square here, just like that. So I'm going to see, this is the original bunny square, and then I just kept doing more border rows until I get the 12 inches. I know I'm very technical and graphic here and professional with my drawing. So that's what I'm going to do. So it's going to be 12. Now, on average, they're saying the length to the waist of a toddler would be 9.5 inches. I'm not going to worry too much about that. I am just going to go until about 12. In fact, what I probably will do is I will only go to 11 and then gauge from there. So it's always easier to kind of add more on than, well, you could always take them out. You just frog it, but I just figure it's less work. So I'm probably going to go to 11 inches and then kind of gauge it from there. So that's what you want to do. You want to make a front panel and a back panel. Once you have that done, if you notice up here, actually, I'll just redo this in a new. Once you have that done, what we're going to do is we're going to go back and we're going to crochet two little, well, you can call them straps, but they're really just basically patches that will go over the shoulders, leaving your neck hole. Okay, so that's going to be super, super easy. We're just going to do two little panels. Then we will sew these two together. Okay, so once you sew the back panel, whoops, so again, my artistry is terrible. So that is the back panel upside down. This is the front panel. And then we will have crocheted these two little panels here. So this is the top open and the neck hole is there. So that way we're going to sew these on and it's going to become one piece. We'll then move on to creating the sleeves, which will then be put on that way. So basically you're forming one big T. Boy, oh boy, I am definitely not a fine artist. Okay, so just going to clean that up there. So those are the sleeves, okay? And then I'll talk about the measurements there. So there's some typical measurements you would use for the sleeves. Once we've created these 4 pieces, then, and we've sewn the sleeves on in this fashion, we're then going to take the back or the front, if this is, this right now should be wrong side facing us. So then we would take one panel and fold it over so that in the end, you're going to have a piece that looks like this when it's all sewn together. And then there's our little buddy here. Okay, so I think, you know, as terrible as this drawing is, I think you guys get the point of how it's going to be made. And then we'll just do a couple little details there for the cuff and you're good to go. But so why I wanted to break this down like that is to show you it's really easy if you just think about it in your shape. So you've got 2 squares and relatively 2 rectangles, and you've got yourself a pullover. Okay, so here's what you have to do. You need to go back and watch the bunny square tutorial, which again, we've got linked below, and you're going to make your 2 squares. Okay, so you're going to make them as tall and as wide as you need for your particular measurement. And again, if you're making this for an adult, because there's nothing that says you can't make this for an adult, you just have to make sure that you get the proper measurements. So that is why this little guy comes in handy. So there's lots of tools out there. And actually, if you haven't subscribed to our newsletter yet, we talk about this in the latest newsletter coming up about the measurements, okay, and how to take measurements. So just make sure that you measure the chest across so that you have the right amount of circumference for your project, and then divide it in 2. And then you'll know how wide you need your squares to be made. And for the most part, to keep it super easy, that's really the only measurement you need. And then of course you make your square until it gets to the height that you want. Now, it's not, I'm making mine in a perfect square, so as you can see, they're recommending 9.5 inches from the top to the bottom. I'm just gonna make it a perfect square, so it'll sit a little bit looser and relaxed on them, okay? But again, this is the beautiful thing about, you know, sewing, crocheting, knitting, is you can adjust the measurements to your need, okay? So I am going to finish this square, do a second square, which you are too, and then I'm gonna meet back up with you here when we have our 2 squares done, our front panel and our back panel. Good luck. Okay, so at this point, I've done a few more border rows and I have reached a width of 9 inches. That means I also have 9 inches from top to bottom. Now, I don't want to go too long on the length because I do want the waistline to cinch in. So I am going to finish creating my square. So I'm happy with the back to waist length is what they call it. I am going to continue to add on so I get 12 more inches across the front. So this will take on a rectangular shape. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to continue from this corner because that's where I joined the round. I'm just going to continue to do rows of half double crochets back and forth for 1.5 inches on this side and then 1.5 inches on this side. That's going to give me the 3 inches I need to create my width of 12 inches. Remember, I'm trying to do a circumference of 24 inches for the size I'm making. So just a little something to keep in mind, okay? So simply, we're just going to go into back and forth mode. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to insert my hook into the chain space and slip stitch just so that I can work right out of that corner. And now I'm going to chain 1 and half double crochet back into that same space. So the chain 1 didn't really count as anything. It just kind of helped me get some height a little bit there. And now I'm just going to continue as I've been doing, inserting into the back loops only for my border, 1 half double crochet into each stitch. And I'm going to do that as usual, but, so see that? So now I'm kind of squaring off there. But when I get to this corner here, I'm not going to continue around the bend anymore. I'm going to chain 1, turn my work, and repeat it back that way. So I'm just going to quickly meet back up with you here in a moment once I get across, just to make sure that you get what I'm saying. Okay, I'm almost at my corner space. 1 more stitch here, half double crochet. And there is my corner space right there. So I will go right into it. Okay, just like that. Now I'm going to chain 1 and turn my work. Okay, so we're going to have to be turning back and forth. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to yarn over and go right back into that first stitch because we're not counting the chain 1 in this case, and half double crochet. And then I just do as I have been doing. So I've been going into the back loops only just because I wanted to create a little bit of texture for my border. And again, you don't have to. You can go right into the stitch. Remember, if you are newer, you want to just be a little patient and take it easy. Okay, and that's it. So that's all I wanted to kind of quickly come on and remind you all that, or just to kind of inform you on, I still have to sew down my ears, is that we do need slightly more width than we do need height, okay? Otherwise, if we kept it perfectly square, it might just look like a dress or an oversized tunic. All right, guys, so off you go, make your 2 panels, and I'll meet you back when you're done. Okay, so I have my 2 panels done here. So I've got my front panel with my bunny square, which I just love. And then the back panel, I decided to just keep it really plain. and just have the bunny on the one. You can certainly just replicate it exactly the same if you like. So because I wanted to create a little bit more of that length, I added some rows on the side, like I said I was going to do. And don't worry if you see a couple little kind of bumpy edges like that. That is all going to work itself out once we put these pieces together. So you've got your two pieces, and now what we want to do, and I've already started doing one here, is just add a little length to go over the shoulders. And some sweater motifs will actually have you make the front panel slightly shorter and then just have it sit like that. So it goes along the back and it dips down in the front. I just wanted to keep it super, super simple to just replicate the front panel exactly the same for the back. And so our shoulder panel, our shoulder bit is just going to bend ever so slightly, because we will be adding a ribbing row there, so not to worry. So I'm just going to take you through how we're going to start that. Okay, so this is where understanding your stitch count comes into play. For me, I have the length that I need, the width, sorry, which is the 12 inches. And I have counted my stitches, and I have 35 stitches going across. You might have 36, you might have 40, doesn't really matter. What we want to understand is how far in to place this little shoulder area here. So on average for a toddler, which is what I'm making this sweater for, you want a neck opening of approximately 3.5 to 3 3/4 inches, which would be about 9 centimeters, okay? So we know we want that far opening. So just to work out the math initially, what I do is I take whatever number I have and I divide it by 3, because I always figure there's one shoulder, two shoulders, and then a center point for the head to come through. So in my case, I have 35 stitches, which doesn't really divide by 3. But I know that if I have 11, 11, and 11, that's 33. And then another 2 would give me my 35. So this is how I worked out my numbers, and it actually worked out beautifully with what I've got here. I am going to stitch 11 stitches from each side in and 11 stitches in. This will leave me with a neck opening of 11 plus 2, 13 stitches for my neck opening. And when I went and measured it, so as you can see I have a little stitch marker here, it gives me pretty much the measurement that I need. So this is just about 4 inches for that neck opening. So it's perfection, right on what I was expecting. And the reason why that happened is because I stitched the width to the recommended width of a toddler, which is the 24 inches. So again, depending on your gauge, right? So if you're a tight crocheter, you're gonna need more rows. But again, I made sure that I had my width, and now whatever stitch count I needed to give me an opening in the center, that's what I used. So that's just kind of my quick way to kind of figure out how to center things. You can also do something really easy, like fold your panel in half, and then you know that where it bends here, that's going to be right down the center of your top. And then from there, you can, so let's say your opening is 4 inches for the neck, just to make it even instead of 3 3/4. You'll say, okay, well, I want to go 2 inches in from this bend. I would put a stitch marker here on each side, and then you know exactly where you need to stitch up. Anyway, you don't have to do any of this stuff because I'm going to tell you exactly what to do. But, you know, I know many of you kind of like to design and figure things out on your own. So that's just a little background tidbit on how to do that. So I've gone ahead and I've already started on this side. So I would start with the right side facing you. And I would start in the edge, the very first stitch. And I would do 1 half double crochet all the way across for 11 stitches. Once you get to the end, you're going to chain 2, turn your work, and then stitch back across. So that's all you're going to do for this short shoulder panel. It is short and sweet. It's only 3 rows, okay? So I just wanted enough to kind of bend over the top. I don't want to make this too long because then my neck opening will sit too low on the child, and I am still going to add a cuff row on the bottom, which will add more length. So I don't want to add too much length at the top, okay? So work out your stitches, and then I'm going to meet you here in a millisecond. I'm just going to grab my hook, and I'm going to take you through doing this side panel. So what's really important, so some people might go, okay, well, I'll start here and move across, so easy peasy, and then I'll just start from the edge and work 11 stitches back. But most people would turn over and start this way. The problem with that is it's going to be obvious, the flow of your stitches. So because I started with the right side facing me, I want to make sure that I continue that same look. So I would still do that, count 11 stitches in, and then place a stitch marker. So then from here, I'm going to still have the work facing me, and I'm going to start from the stitch marker and work my way out and back and forth. This way, so you see how you can see these ridges are continuous? This way, this also continues in the same fashion, okay? And my apologies if I forgot to mention that we are going to be working into the back loops only so that you can continue with that look. Okay, so let me just grab my hook here. Okay, so grab my yarn. I'm going to place a slip knot on my hook. And so I'm going to find where I placed that stitch marker. So I counted 11 stitches in. And right where that stitch marker is, I'm going to place my hook there. And I'm going to slip stitch to join. And I'm going to take this out in a second. I'm going to slip stitch to join my yarn. Just like that. Okay. Now I can take my stitch marker out and continue to work from there. So I'm going to chain 1 to begin, and I'm going to work over that tail, and I'm going to go back into that same stitch, and I'm going to do a half double crochet. And the beautiful thing about having done this in the round is that the stitches are there waiting for you. So I'm going to find the next stitch here. Again, the velvet is always a little bit tricky to see on camera, so I hope you can see that. And that's all we're going to do. 1 half double crochet into each stitch until you get to the end, and that should be 11 stitches. Okay, and I'm just at the very end here. My last stitch is here. Just going in there. That's where I had tied off the square. So I'm just going to ignore that long tail there. So you can see that it's creating a little bit of a ridge there. Okay, and actually the boo-boo, I did make a little boo-boo here, but so I did not go into the back loops here, and so I did not go into the back loops there. So that way it looks a bit more uniform. Okay, so now we're going to chain 2. We're going to turn our work, and we're just going to do this for 2 more rows, okay? Just nice and short. So you're going to chain, so I chained 2, yeah. And so I'm going to skip this stitch here because the chain 2, that's the base of the chain 2. I'm going to go into the next one and insert, and just, again, 1 half double crochet into each stitch all the way to the end. And it's pretty straightforward. We do this for 2 more rows. Okay, I just wanted to quickly show you I'm coming up to the end of row 2. So I'm going to have to work into the top of that chain 2. So we don't want to miss that because it will throw off your stitch count. Now some people, when they're working around the collar area, they might do a decrease here. But because we're going to add a ribbing here, I'm not going to worry about it at all. I'm just going to keep it very uniform, nice and straight. Okay, and if you're ever unsure, make sure you count your stitches, that you want to remain the same stitch count. So 11 stitches, one more row, chain 2, turn my work. I'm going to skip this first one and into that stitch there. And because of the way the half double crochet works, you see when you go into the stitch, it's pushing forward that bottom part of the V. So that's how you get that texture. Okay guys, pretty straightforward. I'm going to let you finish this and then we are done with our shoulders here. Okay, and I'm coming up to the very last stitch. This is the chain 2. I want to find the top. And I'm going to do the last half double crochet into that. And we are done. Okay, so now you should be able to see we've got a neck opening. Now it's really starting to look like a top. So what I want to do before I snip my yarn, I am going to leave, I've got a few of these lying around here. So see, with this one, I left a bit of a tail, probably more than I needed, but you want to leave a bit of a longer tail so that we can sew these 2 panels to the back panel of the top. Okay, so I'm just going to leave a bit here, snip my yarn, and there we go. Okay. So there we have it. So now I would, if I can find it, this is my back panel. So this would get placed on top. So you remember, you're going to line up the bottom and your top. That's totally normal to see that. We've got all these tails everywhere. Because what's going to happen is we're just going to bend this down. And then we're going to sew that together. Okay, so you're going to bend that down and you're going to sew that together. So that way the neck opening is the same on both sides. Now what's super, super easy about this is how you're going to do it is you are going to have the wrong sides. Just going to bring that up a bit. So the wrong sides facing out. So this is my back of my top. And sometimes it's tricky to see what's the back and what's the front. Yeah, so this is the wrong side. So this is basically insides are facing out. You're just going to line them one on top of the other. And you are going to make sure that these line up to the edges here. So I'm just going to bring that up. So you should have that little neck opening there. And you are good to go. Now I know it probably looks like, it doesn't look like much of a neck opening, but remember this is a pullover, it will stretch, okay? So now, speaking of that, if you're not comfortable with it, then you know what you do, you just do a few more rows. It's not the end of the world, okay? Now this velvet yarn has a lot of give here, so I just want to give it a chance to kind of move and stretch and get comfortable. So I didn't want to make it big. Okay, so that's what you would do. You would line these up here and you want to line them up from the edge, working your way in, okay? And I would use a stitch marker to do this. So once you have them lined up, so you want to take it like this. So basically the right sides are facing each other. And just to kind of get you started, I would just find the very first stitch here, which is probably the top of a chain 2 or something like that. And you're going to place a stitch marker or a safety pin. See there? That's the top of the chain 2 right here. Okay? And that's how I would start. Now the tail, as you can see, is on the inside. So I'm going to make sure that I would get another stitch marker and pin it right there. And what you want to do is you want to match up your stitches. And I'm sorry guys, I know this yarn is really tricky to see on camera, but I think you can see a little bit the V's. You know that you have to have 11 here and 11 here. So you want to match up your tail here with the 11th stitch on the side. And then we're just going to do a simple whip stitch. And I'm just going to show you that right now. Okay, so I've counted 11 stitches back from my back panel. Just marked it here with my darning needle. And I just went right into the stitch. And I'm just going to keep this simple and we're going to whip stitch this in. So it just simply means I'm going to start with I'm going to do that again in the same spot. I'm going to go in from the back to the front. Now you can do it from the front to the back. It does not matter. I just find it a little easier to see. And again, hopefully with that velvet yarn, you can see I'm in the first stitch, and now I'm going into the corresponding stitch, and I'm just looping it through again. I don't want to do it too tight, but I also want to make sure that it's snug, nice and secure there. And now I just go into the corresponding next one. Sorry, not the corresponding. I'm just going into the very next stitch here and then finding the corresponding one right in front here. And I really want to try and get the full stitch, which is those 2 loops at the top. And then again, just nice and snug. And then I find my way to the next one. And this is why if you are a newer crocheter, you might want to wait before delving into these velvet yarns, because it just takes a little bit more patience and a little bit of experience. But if you are packing your patience, you will be good to go. So it's not that this is challenging to do, it's just that the yarn sometimes can make it a bit more cumbersome to find your stitches. So as you can see, just going in from the front to the back, okay? And that's what you're going to do until you get to your stitch marker. Then you will knot it up, snip your yarn, and do the same thing on the other side, okay? So this is the first thing you want to do. You want to seam up your shoulders. And next, I'm going to talk to you about our sleeves.